We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Economist Ludwig von Mises said, prior intervention breeds later intervention. His position being that flawed interventionism brings about rectification after rectification to fix the problems the initial intervention created. And with it, well, we see the government's desperate bid for eternal busybody. Now, is this a trap that politicians are caught in, or is it a structural facility of their own device? Now, to discuss this, we're joined by economist and author and Uber fan of Mr. von Mises, Andrew Moran. Welcome aboard, Andrew.
Thank you for having me. I think Mark Angelides is the first person in radio history to quote Mises.
that makes me the second one, I think. I think you've done it many times. Now, Andrew, you did a Swamponomics TV segment recently, which I recommend everybody do go and watch on libertynation.com. That's Swamponomics TV, describing how Philadelphia's soda tax experiment has basically backfired and now requires further government meddling. What are the basics here?
So in 2017, well, technically 2016, they proposed a 1.5 cent tax on an ounce tax on soda, and then it was passed in 2017. The results were not intended as the politicians wanted. Sales tumbled, which gave the government less revenue for their pre-K expansion and government school programs. Consumers shifted to other sugary beverages, or they actually went to different jurisdictions to buy soda pop. The city lost about 1,200 jobs, according to the American Beverage Association. Low-income residents were hurt. So because it's been a failure, there is a slight legislative push at City Hall to repeal it. There's no sunset clause, so who knows if it's actually going to be eliminated. So for now, Philadelphia residents have to endure a 1.5 cent an ounce tax on their favorite black liquid or green liquid.
Well, there's no such thing. There's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. Now, Milton Friedman, there you go. Right, well, I am putting out the quotes by economists today. It's almost as though I've learned something from reading your columns, Andrew. 1,200 jobs lost, as you say, and people traveling across county and state lines to buy their beverages cheaper. Now, surely what the government can't be looking at is adding new programs on top to cater to the deficits and the problems they've caused. They wouldn't be that blind, would they?
Well, probably, because I think, yeah, you cite Mises and the whole, intervention begets intervention, which is a great summary of public policy making. But I think also public policy has turned into that old Groucho Marx joke where he says politics is the art of looking for trouble, finding it everywhere, diagnosing it incorrectly, then applying the wrong remedies. But You see this constantly throughout economic history. When the government intervenes in something, it creates a game of whack-a-mole where you start seeing these other consequences forming. So there's an economic principle. It's called the perverse incentive, or the Cobra effect. So essentially, this is that there was a town in New Delhi, and it had a snake problem about a century ago. And to eradicate this invasion of snakes, the government offered a viper bounty that paid farmers to kill these snakes. What happened? The problem was there was actually an artificial increase in supply because these farmers would actually breed these snakes in their basement and then sell it to the state when they sold it off. So that's not a fable. That actually really happened. And this is the problem when the government intervenes. They create all these other perverse incentives and problems and challenges, and then that needs a bailout. That needs a different public policy program.
Is it axiomatic, though, when the state gets involved in social and economic engineering? Is it axiomatic? Is it almost certain that we're doomed to further intervention to rebalance the, as Tim Donner of Liberty Nation likes to say, the unintended consequences of one-step thinking?
Well, it's hard to say, because I think with politicians, it's a lot of them thinking, well, that's not real socialism. My panacea is the real antidote to this chaos. I have the prescription for what ails us. But I also think it's I mean, not to dive too much. I mean, I guess this is real intensive Econ 101 segment of LN Radio.
I need it.
But it's the old Frederick Bastiat law of what is seen and what is unseen. So we see everything that's in front of us that government does. The state builds the roads. It buys a subway car. It cuts the red ribbons. ribbons. But what is not seen is the money that's taken out of the private economy, and then you could have had private investment to whatever the subjective value was. So the private sector said they wanted to build a road here, not here, or the private sector wanted to buy more appliances as opposed to cutting more red tape, cutting more fancy ribbons for the politicians. So this is what happens, though. The government needs to intervene so it can have the photo ops to cut those red ribbons. They need to lead a crusade to justify their position. So they always need to find a problem in the economy, provide their solution, which is it's always government, and that's what festers, and that's how you have all these challenges in the economy. Why nothing ever gets solved, and why everything exacerbates and worsens.
I think that's best exemplified by the old saying that it needs to be seen to be doing something, which we hear people say without shame. We need to be seen to be doing something rather than we need to be doing something, which is crazy. Now,
I don't want them to do anything, though. I remember with the whole supply chain crisis, and everyone said, "Oh, Pete Buttigieg needs to do something." No, don't do anything. They made these problems worse. Just sit back.
May I point out that Pete Buttigieg went on paternity leave for, I believe it was 3 months, and nobody noticed, and the situation was steadily getting better while he was on maternity leave, and there was nobody there doing anything. And then he came back to work after spending you need to spend time with your new family. Absolutely agreed. But then he came back to work. I think America might have been better off if he'd have become a stay-at-home dad, which might have been a better solution for America's shipping problems. Now, is there any end in sight, or is it perpetually going to be fixing the mistakes of the past?
Well, I think to answer that question, I think probably the best example of it would be the coronavirus pandemic. All the effects of what happened during the public health crisis are never going to subside whatsoever. Whether you think it was a wise idea or not, the government shut down the economy. But to fund the lockdown, the government ensured people didn't lose their jobs. The government founded the PPP, offer stimulus checks for consumers and businesses, provide relief to everyone. But then how did this need to be funded? The government needed to run deficits. What happened then? The Federal Reserve monetized deficits. But then this resulted in the 40-year high inflation. And then the Fed let inflation spiral out of control. So now what's going on? States are offering inflation relief checks to households across the states. Now you have a Fed tightening policy by raising interest rates, which will then trigger recession. What happens in recession? The government offers stimulus checks, provides all this government funding, provides all these, expanding the size and scope of government to, cure the economic recession and stimulate growth. And now this is going to be happening time and time again. And then now what does the government do? What does the Federal Reserve need to do again to support the government in its quest to stop a recession? Monetize the debt, cut interest rates, to repeat everything that's been going on wrong over the last 10, 20, 30 years. So the pandemic, if you want to talk about intervention and perpetual intervention and perpetual meddling, the coronavirus pandemic is a great example of that.
Andrew Moran, I think I'll leave us with yet another quote, this time by Fleetwood Mac. It looks like they're never going to break the chain. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio, heard across the Radio America network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. And remember, you can tune in for Liberty Nation on WFYL 1180 AM out of Chester Springs, Philadelphia. Thanks for being here, Philly. Coming up after this break, we're talking Liberty with Scott DeCasenza. Is it human trafficking when the federal government does it in the dead of night? Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5. Produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone. Hosted by Liberty Nation's Lisa K. Donner. Joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors. Deconstructing leftist narratives. Debating the hot topics. And remembering to laugh. Join the official conservative safe space.
You only did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5.